Hey guys, welcome back. So in this video, we're going to speak about the new map charts feature in Excel 2016 and also in Office 365. So there's a new type of chart, which is the map chart, that's been introduced in Excel 2016 and in Office 365. And this is going to allow us to go from this raw data here where we have the date, the country, the region, and the sales amount to this interactive map chart here, where you can select the region and only the countries in that particular region get colored in green depending on their sales. So the higher the sales, the darker their green color. As you can see here, as I change the region here using my slicer, only the countries in that particular region here get highlighted in green. And we're going to show step by step how to build this interactive map chart. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay guys, so I'm gonna start creating my interactive map chart in a new sheet here called the demo sheet, and if you need to follow along with me, you can simply download the example workbook from the resources section and create a new sheet and start following along. So I'm actually gonna need a list of my countries, and it's going to be a dynamic and unique list of my countries, and I'm going to do that through creating a new mini pivot table here containing the list of countries. And this is a unique list of countries, and this is going to allow my interactive map chart to be dynamic, so that if we add more countries on our data, they'll be added automatically to the chart by just doing a simple refresh of our pivot tables. So to do that, we're actually going to go to our data here, and I'm going to insert a new pivot table. So I'm going to go to insert pivot table, and I'm going to put it on my existing worksheet here, which is the countries list, because I already have this sheet created. And I'm going to click OK here, and then I'm going to put my country on the rows section. So this is how I created this pivot table, guys. And if you need to remove the grand total, you go to the design, and then on grand totals, you remove the grand totals by clicking on off for rows and columns here, and here you don't have a grand total. So this is how I created this pivot table, and you can change its color as well to the color of your liking. But I'm just gonna delete it here because I already have this pivot table. So I'm gonna select it, clear all. As you can see here, I managed to delete the pivot table. And this is how I created the pivot table. Now let's go back to our demo sheet here, and we're actually going to create another pivot table here. So this pivot table is going to have the list of countries and their sales. So I'm going to go to my data here and then go to insert pivot table. I'm going to put it on an existing worksheet, which is the demo sheet. I'm going to put the pivot table here, for example. I'm going to click OK here, and all I need to do is to put my country here and the sales amount. And you can change the color of this pivot table here by going to design, and I'm going to give it a green color here so that it would be compatible with my overall theme. You could also remove the grand total by going to grand total and then going to off for rows and columns. And now I need to create the table that is going to feed my map chart. So to do that, I need just a list of my countries and their sales. So I could actually just copy my countries here and paste them, but this is actually not going to make my list dynamic because I just copied my countries. So to make my list dynamic, I need to get my list from the countries list pivot table here, and I'm going to create a dynamic range that is going to get me the countries from this countries list pivot table. So to do that, I can use either the offset function or the index function to create a dynamic range. So I'm going to do it with the offset function here, equals offset, and then I'm going to start from this country here, the first country, and I'm going to absolute that, and then how many rows am I going to move? It's actually going to be 0. I'm not going to move any rows. And how many columns? I'm not going to move any columns. And then the height of the range is going to be the count of the countries that I have here, and I'm going to absolute that as well. And then the width is actually going to be 1. I'm going to press enter, and actually you will see the range here be spilled on the spreadsheet because this is the new Office 365, and this is how dynamic arrays work. They actually get spilled automatically, but if you have Office 2016, this won't be the case, and you would actually normally have an error or have one country only appearing in one cell. But this is a great feature actually that allows me to demonstrate dynamic ranges easily for you. So I created my dynamic range here, and I'm just going to copy it here and go to formulas, name manager, create a named range from it. I already have a named range called countries here because I created it before. So I'm just going to create a new one here called countries 2. And I just wrote my formula here. I'm going to press OK. So now I have my dynamic range that covers these countries. And I have a little bit extra till row 38 so that we can allow for the expansion to add more countries. I'm going to close here, and now I have a dynamic range containing my countries. So in order to get my countries dynamically, I'm just going to write a formula here to index against my dynamic range. So index countries, so it could be countries or countries 2, they are both the same thing. And then the row number is going to be given by the rows function, which is going to be basically a counter here. So I'm going to count here from row 5 to 5, and I'm going to absolute the starting row and make the ending row here loose or not absolute. And then the column number is going to be only 1, and I'm going to close my brackets here and press enter. And now if we drag the formula down, we get some errors here after we have finished all the countries in the range, and that's normal because we're trying to index rows here that do not exist in the range, because the range finishes at the bottom country here. Since it's dynamic, it's going to expand if we add more countries, but for now it just finishes here at the bottom country, which is the United States. So in order to get over this error, we're just going to put an if error here, and in case we have an error, we're just going to get a blank value here, and we're going to drag the formula down. As you can see here, now we don't get an error, we just get a blank value. And now we can get the values of the sales here from the pivot table using a simple VLOOKUP. So I'm just going to write equals VLOOKUP here, and I'm going to look up the country in this pivot table here, and I'm going to allow for some extra growth here for the pivot table in case we add new countries. And the column index number is going to be 2, and range lookup is going to be an exact match here. And I'm going to press enter and double click to drag the formula down. As you can see here, we get some NA values because these cells here have blank values, so it cannot find sales for blank values. I'm going to give some formatting here to my cells. So I'm going to give it a currency, and I'm going to show you how we're going to deal with these NA values. Now let's start plotting our map chart here. So I'm going to select my countries and sales, and then go to insert and then maps here, and I'm going to insert a map chart. And as you can see here, the map chart has been inserted, and it's highlighting the countries here that are in the list and their sales. And as you can see here, the color gets darker as the sales get higher, and you can change the color by clicking on this brush here, and you can change your colors here. So I'm just going to change it here to varying green here, monochromatic green, to change it to the green color. And I'm going to change the title of the chart here to sales per country, for example. And as you can see here, we managed to create our map chart. Now let's insert a slicer to be able to filter our countries by region or by continent. So to do that, I'm just going to highlight my pivot table here, go to insert, and then go to slicer. I'm going to insert a slicer for the region here. I'm going to click OK. So as you can see here, I managed to insert a slicer for the region, and I'm going to give it a green color. And I have actually a custom style that I created for the slicer that will make it blend nicely with the background. So here's our slicer here, but I actually need the slicer to be spread across columns here. So I'm going to increase the number of columns on the slicer here, maybe 3 columns. So as you can see here, I managed to create my slicer, and now I'm able to filter my countries here by region. As you can see here, when I filter my countries by region, only the countries in that particular region here get highlighted on the map chart. But as you can see here, we've got these NA values which actually look ugly. So in order to make them look better, we're gonna create a conditional formatting so that if we have an NA value, this NA error, it would actually disappear by having the font turn into white, which is the same color as the filling of the cell, so that it would be invisible. So to do that, I'm actually going to highlight my sales column here, and I'm going to go to conditional formatting, and then I'm going to create a new rule here, and the formula I'm going to use is NA this cell here, and I need to absolute the column part only. I'm going to close my brackets. So this is actually going to make my conditional formatting go across the column as we go down here. So let's change the formatting. The formatting that we want is that we want the font to be white here, and we're just going to click OK, and we're going to click OK here. So as you can see here, we managed to get rid of the NA values here, and as you can see here, Excel is just giving us a warning here that these cells contain NA values, so we're actually going to ignore the error. You could also do an if error here and do if error NA, and I think Excel does not give you a warning about that, because in this case you're actually getting the error from the if error formula, not actually getting an error. So this is how you can deal with the NA error, and now your data looks much better. Now let's remove the grid so that everything looks cleaner here. So I'm going to go to the view tab on the ribbon here and uncheck grid lines, and now everything looks a lot cleaner. As you can see here, this slicer blends with the background because of the custom styling that I created, and I created this custom styling simply by copying an existing style. So I'm going to go to the slicer styles here, right click, duplicate, and create a new style here with no fill, and I'm going to actually format the whole slicer. So I'm going to go to whole slicer here, format, and then the fill is going to be no color, and the border is going to be no border as well here. So it's no fill, no border, and I'm going to call it no fill, no border 2 because I already created one here. I'm going to click OK here. So all you need to do now is to select your new slicer style here after creating it, and now as you can see here, the style of the slicer is that it doesn't have any filling, so it actually blends with the background, and it doesn't have any borders as well. So this helps everything look a lot cleaner. Now let's try to add another country here to our data and see what's going to happen. So I'm going to go to my data tab here, and I'm going to go to the last row. I'm just going to copy one row here, and then I'm just going to change the country on it. Let's put Russia. Actually, Russia is not part of our countries here. And I'm gonna refresh here my data, and let's go to the demo tab here, and as you can see here, we have another country added, which is Russia. But actually, let's look at our chart. You can see here our chart is actually not plotting all the countries, because the x-axis range on the chart and the y-axis range on the chart are actually static and they are not dynamic. So every time we add a new country, we actually need to stretch the ranges here to include the new country. And this is not something that we want to do. We want it to do that dynamically. So in order to do that dynamically, we need to assign dynamic ranges to the x-axis range and the y-axis range on the chart. So to do that, we're going to create two dynamic ranges. A dynamic range here for the list of countries, and another dynamic range here for the sales that stretches only as long as the countries. So if you have 20 countries, you will have 20 sales as well on the y-axis. You get the idea. So let's create two dynamic ranges. I'm gonna create the first dynamic range here for the x-axis. So I'm gonna write equals offset, and I'm gonna start from the first country here, and I'm gonna absolute my beginning here, and then we're gonna move 0 rows, 0 columns, and the height is gonna be actually as long as we have countries and we don't have blank values, because guys, the formula here is actually gonna give us a blank value in case the list of countries is finished. So in order to stretch as long as the non-blank values only, let's actually try the count A function first, just to demonstrate that. So count A, and I'm gonna stretch here longer than my list of countries, and I'm gonna absolute that here, and then I'm gonna put 1 on the columns, and let's see actually what we get from this dynamic range. You can see here the count A function will count the cells that have values, actually text values, and even though this is a blank value here that we have, it's still counted as a value by the count A function. So as you can see here, at the end of the range we have some blank cells, and this is not something what we want. We want only the range to stretch along the countries only, and we needed to ignore these blank cells that were created by our if error function here. So in order to do that, we're not going to use the count a function. We're actually going to use a combination of sum product and the len function. So it's going to be sum product, and I'm going to put two negative signs here, and I'm going to open a bracket, and then it's going to be len these cells here. I'm going to absolute that, and we're going to put greater than 0. And I'm going to close the brackets here around my len function, and then close the brackets for the sum product function. Okay, so let's take a minute actually to understand what this sum product and len combination are doing. So basically we're testing if each of these cells have a text that is greater than 0 characters. So a blank cell has a text that is 0 characters. So this test here is going to test each and every cell and output an array of true and false values. So if I highlight this and press F9, I'm going to get an array of true and false values, and I get true values as long as we have a country, and then when we start having blank values, I start getting false values. I'm going to press Ctrl and Z here to go back to my formula. So as you can see here, this is a Boolean test that is testing each cell here of these cells against a condition, and the condition is basically that we have more than 0 characters. And now we put these double negatives just to convert these true and false values to ones and zeros. So if I highlight this whole thing here, including the double negatives, so the whole thing with brackets around the len, including double negatives, and I press F9, as you can see here, I get ones and zeros. So actually the sum product is just going to sum these ones and zeros, and I'll get a value, and the value is going to be basically the height of my range that it needs to extend to, and the height is going to be simply the summation of the ones, and the ones, as we all know, were the trues. And so basically the trues are the cells that had countries. So simply it just gives me the height of the range, so that the range would only stretch along the cells that actually have countries, and it would ignore the cells that have blank values. So I'm going to press Ctrl and Z here. So I'd encourage you actually to check this formula again just to be able to understand it well. So open the example workbook and just try to play with it so that we'd be able to understand it better. And here the width of my range is going to be one column only, and I'm going to press enter. So if I press enter here, you can see here that the dynamic range that I get, and as you can see here, the range spills because of the new dynamic arrays feature in Office 365. So normally if you're doing this on Excel 2016, you would have an error, or you would have just one country out of the range. Okay, so we managed to create the x-axis range. Now let's create the y-axis range here. Now, just for the sake of variation, I'm going to create the y-axis range using index. So it's going to be equals to, we're going to put the starting cell here, and we're going to put a colon, and we need to absolute the starting cell for creating dynamic ranges with index. And then we put the index function here, and our array is going to be the values here for the sales, and we're going to put a little extra to allow for the growth of countries, or for the addition of extra countries. And we're going to absolute our array here, and the row number is going to be our sum product function, and we're going to test for the length as well as we've done, but we're going to do that on the countries here. So negative negative, and we're going to open brackets len these countries here. We're going to absolute the countries greater than 0 here, and we're going to close the brackets here around the len function, and then we're going to close the brackets around the sum product, and column number is going to be 1, and we're going to press enter here. As you can see here, because of the new dynamic arrays feature in Office 365, you can see here that it shows us the dynamic range here gets spilled across the cells. But if you're using Excel 2016, you would just see one value, or you would see an error. So now we've created the x-axis range and the y-axis range. We just need to give them names. We need to assign them names. So I'm actually going to copy my x-axis range here, and I'm going to go to the Formulas tab, Name Manager, and create a name. As you can see here, I've actually created the two ranges already, so I'm just going to call it x-axis 2 here because I already have an x-axis 1, and I'm going to click OK here. And then I'm going to copy my y-axis and Name Manager, New, and I'm going to call it y-axis 2. I'm going to paste the formula here, click OK, and close here. And now we're going to assign our x-axis and y-axis ranges to our chart here. So I'm going to click on my chart, right click, and then select data here. And then for the countries, I'm going to click on edit to edit this range here for the x-axis, and I'm going to delete just up until before the exclamation mark, and I'm going to press F3 on my keyboard here. I'm going to put the ranges x-axis 2 here, click OK, and then for the y-axis, for the sales, edit, and then I'm actually going to delete that here up until before the exclamation mark, and I'm going to press F3 on my keyboard, and then y-axis 2, and I'm going to click OK, click OK again here. So as you can see here, now we have the ranges for the chart as dynamic ranges. So whenever we select a region here, as you can see here, we only have the ranges for the chart across the countries only, and we don't have it here on any blank values. So as you can see here, now after assigning the dynamic ranges to the chart, we're able to go to our data and add another country here. So let's just create another country, for example Denmark here. We don't have Denmark on our data, and then let's refresh our data here and then go to the demo. And as you can see here, Denmark has been added, and as you can see here as well, the chart is actually including Denmark here on the range. And if we select Europe, you can see here that Denmark appears on as part of Europe as well, and we can see its value. And let me tell you one more thing, which is that the NA values here on the sales, they actually help the chart plot only the countries in that particular region. So for example, if the values were 0, so if I change the F error here to produce 0 values here, if we don't have the country on the list here, and we just extend the formula here across, you can see here that actually the countries that are not part of a region still get highlighted in light green, as you can see here. Whereas if I press Ctrl and Z here to remove my formula, only the countries in that particular region that we've selected, so here in our case Europe, get selected. So let me press Ctrl and Y again to show you the difference here. As you can see here, countries in North America and South America, they have very, very light green here, because now it's a 0 value, so the chart is reading it as 0 sales instead of reading it, you know, I have not selected this region, or you have not selected this region, so we're not going to show it on the chart. So actually you need to have the values display an NA value if you don't need the countries outside the regions that you selected to appear, which is most probably what you will need when you create such an interactive map chart. So I'm going to press Ctrl and Z here, Ctrl and Z again, to just keep it as NA. Now we don't actually need this. This was just for demonstration, so I'm going to select it here, press delete, and as you can see here, we have created our interactive map chart, and as you can see here, only the countries in the region that we select get highlighted on the chart. It's also a good practice to move your pivot table to a new worksheet, so you can always highlight the pivot table here and then just press Ctrl and X to move it to a new sheet. Call it pivot, for example, and just move my pivot table to the new sheet. But actually, when we go here to our demo sheet here, you can see here that the values have disappeared because now the VLOOKUP is not looking up in the right place. So we need to change the VLOOKUP actually to look up in the right sheet here, and press enter and just drag the formula down, and there you go, we fixed our chart. Now, let's speak about some notes and remarks regarding these new map charts in Excel. So, these new map charts need an internet connection in order to work properly. So, whenever you create a new map chart or you modify it by adding new regions or new data, you need to have an internet connection on your computer. That is simply because it gets its data from the Bing search engine that was created by Microsoft. So as you can see here, I've got some data here for the territory and the city and the population in India. And if I select just the city and the population and try to insert a map chart here, you can see here it gives me an error. Map charts need geographical data such as country, region, state, province, county, or postal code. Check your data and try again. So it cannot identify cities. While if I actually delete this and I try to insert another map chart, I only select the territory column and then I press Control and hold Control and select the population here and go to Insert and then Maps, and I just insert a new map chart here. You can see here it's able to identify our regions here because I've given it the territory. So the lowest in granularity it can go to is actually territory. So it cannot plot cities or streets. It can actually plot postal codes though. So I've got some data here with the postal codes and the sales in Toronto, Canada. So if I actually highlight my data here and then go to Insert and then go to Maps and insert a new map chart, you can see here it's been able to insert a map chart. However, the map here is actually not the correct map because this is not the map of the postal codes and there is nothing highlighted as well. This is the map of Ontario, which is the province that Toronto is located in. So you can actually change it to the right map here by double clicking and then going to under series options here. You go to series options again, series options, and then under the map area you select only regions with data. So it's currently plotting the map for Ontario, which is a province that contains Toronto, but here now it's plotting the correct areas here of Toronto that these postal codes belong to. As you can see here, the higher the sales amounts, the darker the blue color. You could also view the data labels by right-clicking here and then add data labels. So now we've added the data labels, and you can format your data labels by clicking on one data label here and then go to Home. As you can see here, we can change the font color, we can increase the font size, and we can do all sorts of formatting on these data labels. Okay guys, so that's it guys for the new map charts in Excel 2016 and Office 365. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you on the next one.
If you like the video, press the like button and share it with your friends. And if you'd like to see more videos about creating dashboards in Excel, do let me know in the comments below. And if you'd like to learn more about creating dashboards in Excel, check out my Excel dashboards course, link below in the description. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.